A string of mysterious explosions, a warning from Ukraine's president, and a threat from a Russian general. Could this sliver of land, Transnistria, a breakaway region of Moldova, be a target of Vladimir Putin after he links up the east and south of Ukraine? Welcome to the programme. I'm Hala Mahieddine. Civilians have begun to leave Moldova's breakaway state of Transnistria due to fear that the Russian-Ukraine conflict will spill over into their country. With around 1,500 Russian troops stationed in the breakaway region, analysts say these forces could join Russia in its attack upon Ukraine. Russia may even want to take control of Moldova and use Transnistria as its entry point. Such fears have come from images of Belarus seemingly showing Russian plans to attack Transnistria, and from a comment by a Russian military commander who said control over southern Ukraine will provide another access point to Transnistria. The Moldovan president says there is no imminent risk of a Russian attack to her country. Transnistria has close ties with Russia and is governed by pro-Russian separatists. So an attack by Russia could bring the region under Russian control. Whilst Moldova wants EU membership, conflict with Russia could push back this ambition. So is Transnistria part of Putin's calculation for a greater Russia? Well, let's bring in our panel to discuss this. In Florida, Tatsiana Kulakevich. She's an assistant professor at the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies and a research fellow at the Institute on Russia at the University of South Florida. In Washington, D.C., we're joined by Alejandro Sanchez. He's an Eastern Europe military analyst who's written extensively about Transnistria and wider Moldova. And finally, in Istanbul, we're joined by Lucia Scripcari. She's a researcher of Moldovan political affairs, and she also specialises in public international law. Thank you to all of you for joining us here for this discussion. I think it's important to start with Transnistria itself. Just so our viewers are familiar, Transnistria, for those not familiar, is situated between Moldova and Ukraine. And for 30 years, it's been in a state of frozen conflict between Moldova and the separatist region Transnistria. Now, the Moldovan and Transnistrian forces fought in 1992 as Moldova tried to retain its breakaway region. Since then, Russia has maintained a military presence in the region and supports Transnistria economically through free gas and has provided Russian passports to some citizens. Moldova says that Russian troops in Transnistria are illegal and has called for their removal. Moscow says its troops remain there to keep the peace in the narrow strip of land. That's just some of the general backgrounds that viewers should know. But Tatsiana Kulakevich, why do you think Transnistria is important? And is there anything I've missed out? What would you underline our viewers should know about Transnistria?
Yes, Moldova is a former Soviet republic, and it's very important, similar to Ukraine, similar to Belarus and Georgia. And Vladimir Putin, at the beginning of the war, clearly stated that Ukraine should not exist. So Moldova is on the list, and Transnistria actually is a place through which Russia was trying and was keeping Moldova in check, preventing it from its Western aspirations, because Moldova cannot join the European Union if it does not control its borders.
So there is a tension there between whether Moldova and Transnistria want to turn towards the west or towards the east. Alejandro Sanchez, why does Transnistria want to break away? Why does it want to be part of Russia?
The reason is because of there are historical reasons that date back to the breakup of the Soviet Union as well as the 1992 war. Essentially, Transnistrians, or at least in the leaders of Transnistria, argued that they need to either be independent or become part of Russia in order to be protected. They believe, or at least they argue, that if they remain part of Moldova, that their culture is going to be lost, that they're going to be assimilated into Moldova, that they're going to lose their options, their freedoms to speak their own language, which will be Russian. There's also this theory that Moldova will eventually join Romania and become part of, create a union between the two countries, which means that if that happens, then the Transnistrians, the ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking Transnistrians will lose their identity. At least that's the argument that the Transnistrian leadership has put forward, has argued for the past 30 years, ever since the war and even before that.
And that's certainly something, Alejandro Sanchez, that Russian generals have argued, that they want to protect this Russian-speaking population. But in terms of this fear of Moldova invading, I mean, just talk us through the numbers, because there's a significant military presence and strength in Transnistria, but Moldova, its military footprint, isn't that large.
Absolutely correct. So when we talk about the Russian military presence, we have to divide them. Overall, there are around 1,500 Russian troops. The Russian government defines some of them as peacekeepers, which are around 400 more or less, 300 to 400. The rest of them are Russian troops, which are in Transnistria, in places like Kobasna, for example, and they are there to guard military installations in the region, especially in Kobasna. The Transnistrian military, or at least the so-called military, we're talking about maybe 5,000 max. It's not really particularly large. Then when it comes to Moldova, we're talking about its military strength has to be between 7,000 to 8,000, maybe 9,000 by this point, not counting the military reserve. When it comes to the equipment that they utilize, both sides are actually fairly, to be honest, weak, at least when compared to other European countries in the region.
Well, that's the military standpoint. Let's look at the politics of this. Lucia Scripcari, Transnistria says it's independent, it wants to be independent, but no one really has recognized this independence, have they? Not even Russia, which is supposedly supportive of Transnistria and its people. Why hasn't Russia declared that it's an independent state? Why isn't it supporting this independent statehood?
You correctly point out that even Russia did not recognize the self-proclaimed independence of Transnistria. And this is because it recognized the sovereignty of the Republic of Moldova. Therefore, it negotiated on a special status to be given to Transnistria, and it had several plans for that. Since 2003, Russia has been advancing the federalization plans for Moldova, and it proved unsuccessful, but it envisaged a special status given to Transnistria, and that in essence would have given it more influence over in the Moldovan parliament. So basically, it would have veto any foreign policy decision of Moldova. And as you're well aware, Moldova has Western aspirations. It wants to become a member of the European Union. So that conflict, that frozen conflict, is in fact favored because through this way Russia can control the Moldovan foreign policy through the tool of frozen conflict in Transnistria.
So this has echoes, you could argue, with what's happened in Ukraine. Ukraine back in 2014 very much was aiming for a more European tilt, and Russia wasn't keen, let's say. So it seems like a very similar state of affairs. Tatsiana Kulakevich, what does Moldova want? They must be aware of what happened on their doorstep with Ukraine and the events that this unleashed. Is Moldova aware of that? Are they still prepared to continue pushing towards Europe?
Moldova actually applied for the European Union candidacy, together with Ukraine and Georgia. They sent their applications like days apart, and currently we hear from the European Union leaders that they accepted that application from Moldova, and they are interested in supporting Moldova in this aspiration. And actually, Moldova has a good chance to become a candidate because of the unique situation with the war in Ukraine. Moldova always was interested and tried, but European Union was reluctant because of this frozen conflict that can be unfrozen at any moment, which, well, we are discussing it right now because it is, that's what Russia actually wants, to unfreeze it.
But why? Why is it wanting to join the EU? What's in it for Moldova? Is it looking for security guarantees, economic prospects? Tatsiana, what's all this about?
Well, Moldova borders European Union, and while because in Moldova we have different political forces kind of, let's say, fighting each other. That's why Moldova, some of these politicians are pro-Russian at some point, some are pro-European Union. That's why we see that Moldova is not very much interested in becoming a NATO member, but it wants to be European Union member because of trade. Well, Romania is very close to Moldova, and it is already a European Union member. So yeah, it's in economic interests and of course in political interests. And if it was not, if it hadn't been for Transnistria, Moldova would have, tried harder, I would say.
Okay, well, the current president of Moldova is, of course, more pro-European than her predecessor. Let's hear from the Moldovan president herself about what she thinks about this situation.
Of course, that incident that took place in Transnistria are worrying. Our analysts show that these incidents were generated by the pro-war forces from inside the region. Authorities, the government, have contingency plans for this type of situation. I repeat, we don't see an intimate risk right now.
Well, that was the Moldovan president there saying she doesn't see an imminent risk right now. Alejandro Sanchez, do you agree?
The Moldovan Minister of Defense, Anatoly apologies if I forget his last name right now, but the Moldovan government and especially Minister of Defense have said that they have been preparing for any kind of eventuality for a few months, ever since being like November or even before that, when the Russian military started moving its forces to the border with Ukraine. So that is what they're saying. At the same time, the Moldovan government, the Moldovan Minister of Defense, the Moldovan military continue to say that there's no cause for alarm. There have not been any calls for general mobilizations. The Moldovan military reserve has not been called to go back to their bases to prepare for any kind of eventuality, any kind of conflict. So I believe that Chisinau so far believes that there's no cause for alarm just yet. But unfortunately, sometimes it's very unpredictable. And there have been incidents that have made not only Chisinau, but even Europe and Washington, D.C. as well, concerned. Like, for example, in late April, there was a bizarre incident in Transnistria where somebody, we're not sure whom, shot fire-propelled grenades to two transmission towers in Transnistria, and I believe the Transnistrian Ministry of State Security. Both Tiraspol and Russia are saying that, this attack was carried out by Ukrainian infiltrators that are trying to destabilize the region. The concern is that this was for Chisinau, for Europe and the Washington, D.C., is that this incident is some kind of false flag, something that maybe either Tiraspol or Moscow organized in order to justify some kind of military operation in the future.
It does, again, it seems to have parallels with what was happening in the run-up to the conflict in Ukraine. Lucia Scripcari, do you think the Moldovan president here is in denial when she says there's no cause for alarm with these explosions that are happening, these towers getting bombed? Or do you think she's keeping up appearances in order to maintain this facade, maintain this momentum toward EU membership?
Well, I think the reason why the Moldovan government maintains that there is not an imminent threat is because Moldovan constitution provides for neutrality of Moldova. So given the neutrality, the government position is that we are not under a threat to be attacked, because this what has been advanced in Ukraine when invading Ukraine, its aspirations to become a NATO member. And this is not the case in Moldova because, as I said, our constitution provides for neutrality. Although I personally believe that there is an imminent threat, because we have heard of what Russian general said about Transnistria, and it said that Transnistria, in fact, is the second part of the so-called special military operation. And so it shows that the land corridor aspirations of Russia would become successful if Transnistria would be joined it. So basically, the land corridor would start from Donetsk and move through Odessa, which is 50 kilometers from Transnistria, and now there are escalations in this region as well. And Moldova is in the front line of the war. So
quite, but Russia would have to make some significant gains on the Moldovan border, and it's certainly not clear that that's happening now. But I just want to pick up on something you said, Lucia, that you have this concept of neutrality in the Moldovan constitution. That's fine. If the battle did come to Moldova, if Russia did make it to Transnistria, is Moldova able to defend itself? Can you see Moldova trying to defend itself?
Totally not. Moldova is very fragile. It has a very weak military. Given its neutrality, it's not a member of a military organization, and its population is very small. So starting with the weak military, yes, despite Moldova not being a member of a military organization, it has received some military aid. However, it was just limited to military equipment and does not extend to the lethal weapons. And EU has assisted Moldova with the military aid, which extends, as I said, to the military equipment and its fight against cyber attacks. So basically, this support was limited with that. Okay. And as I mentioned, the population is very small. It consists of 2.6 million people. So yeah, the state is very fragile in this sense.
It certainly appears that. What's your take, Tatsiana Kulakevich? What do you think would happen? Is it likely, do you think, that the Russian army could reach Moldova? Have they an interest in going there? And if they did, what do you think Moldova's chances are for defending an assault?
We should remember that out of 1,500 of soldiers on Transnistrian territory who are considered Russian soldiers, about 70% are local residents who were given Russian passports. And these people, some of them, and maybe even most of them, never been to Russia necessarily. And I would say none of us would love if war comes to our homes. So that's why they would be reluctant, that they would not willingly fight the war unless Russian soldiers actually come to Transnistria, because Transnistria has allegiance to Russia. And Moldova is vulnerable because of that weak military. So sometimes people are saying that Moldova is even weaker than Transnistria, and Transnistria Transnistria has a second rank soldiers there. So we've been seeing rockets go into Odessa, which is what experts are talking about. If Russian soldiers reach Odessa, that's when they can reach Transnistria. That's when Moldova would be very vulnerable. But Transnistria on paper looks as a great launching pad and a place for the invasion of Moldova, but Russian soldiers need to physically come to Odessa first for Transnistria to become a threat to Moldova.
Just before I'm sorry to jump in there, Tatsiana, because you did say something which I found very interesting when you talked about the Russian inverted commas soldiers being local, essentially. Do you see divided loyalties there at all? I mean, where is Transnistria in all of this? There's a conflict happening on its doorstep. Are Transnistrians in favor of what's happening in Ukraine or not?
Well, yeah, so that's a very interesting question because we know that Transnistria has allegiance to Russia, but at the same time, after 2014, when Ukraine started closing its own borders after the war in 2014 in the eastern Ukraine began, Transnistria started trading more and more with the European Union after Moldova signed the free trade agreement with the European Union. So Transnistria, thanks to Moldova, is trading more and more with the West, and its trade with Russia is declining. So it has interest in the West, and it does still have interest from Russia because it receives free gas. So I would say they would prefer their current status because they are benefiting from both sides, and that's why they will not necessarily be interested in becoming involved in the war. And probably, we need to look at the surveys, might be interested in kind of being friendly with Moldova, actually.
Okay, well, that's what they think in Transnistria. Let's take a listen to what some Moldovans think about this situation in Chisinau, the capital, and that was after, of course, the series of blasts that took place in Transnistria.
We don't need to worry that much until things escalate. A lot of people panic, and when you're panicking, you make bad calls. You can't think clearly and are easily manipulated.
Everything going on in Transnistria are provocations. Let's hope these provocations won't make the wrath happening in Ukraine spill over on our people.
Alejandro Sanchez, obviously it's a concerning situation with the conflict on the doorstep, with these blasts happening. We've heard about some of the military weaknesses, and of course the Constitution says we must be neutral, but if conflict came to Moldova, where do you see the path ahead lying? Do you think that Moldova would just accept what's happened? Do you think they will put up a fight? Or do you think there's a chance that a neighbour, perhaps a NATO member state neighbour, might get involved? How do you see events playing out from here?
Many points I really want to make, but I'll try to make them brief. First of all, like Lucia and Tatsiana have mentioned, Moldova cannot join NATO. It's Article 11 of its constitution says that the country is permanently neutral. So even if Moldova wanted tomorrow to join NATO, it will have to amend his constitution, which probably mean an act of Congress or a decision by the Supreme Court, or at the very least a referendum. So it's not going to happen anytime soon. Point one. Point two. When we talk about Transnistria, joining the war for to help Russia, what do we mean by this? Do we mean that they're going to try to open up a second front and attack Ukraine from another one of its borders, which will be very problematic for Ukraine right now? Or are we saying that the Russian military troops, the so-called peacekeepers, supported by Transnistria, are going to try to cross the river and try to take out Chisinau and and just really take over the government, take over the country. I do agree with my co-panelists when they state that I don't think that the Transnistrian population has the stomach or the will to really go into war right now. But let's assume for a second that it does happen. I do believe Moldovans will fight. They're going to at least try to put some kind of effort. And and the big question is really going to be, what will neighboring countries like Romania, Romania is really the only country that really borders Moldova apart from Ukraine. What will the rest of NATO, especially led by Romania, how much are they willing to go to help out Moldova?
Okay, there's lots of big questions that we have raised in this debate. Sadly, we are out of time, but I know I've learned a lot about Transnistria and this region, which certainly does risk seeing more instability as events continue. But I would like to thank all three of you, Tatsiana Kulakevich, Alejandro Sanchez, and Lucia Scripcari, for letting us know more about this fluid situation. Remember, of course, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search Roundtable TRT World. For now, from me and all the team here, goodbye. Thank you for watching.